Hello, friends, enemies, and those still under review. Welcome or welcome back to Elle Chats, where I chat once a week about things that I'm a fan of. This week, we're going to be talking about all the other characters in Delicious in Dungeon that I didn't cover in my first video. Yes, we are going back to the world of Delicious in Dungeon, or Dungeon Meshi, for this video. I'm going to be focusing more on the antagonists as well as some of the secondary characters in this video as compared to the first. So if you haven't seen the first one and want to know the plot, I recommend you go check it out. I will have a link in the description below, and if I can figure out the title card thing, I'll have it there too. I figured the best way to tackle this is to first focus on the main protagonist characters and then follow through with the antagonist characters. If you like this video and want to hear more from me, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And without further ado, let's get into it. The first character I want to touch on, and I left out of my initial video, is Izutsumi. Izutsumi is from the eastern part of this world. She's also a forcibly made beastkin. She isn't a naturally occurring one like a kobold. She's initially snarky, rude, and doesn't really want to rely on others. She initially follows the party because she figures that because Marcel knows dark magic, that she'll be able to undo the curse that made her into a beastkin. Unfortunately, it can't be undone. The way that Marcel describes it is that it is two souls inhabiting one body, and it cannot be untangled. I do like Izutsumi and Izutsumi's character arc through the show, where she learns to be more open and rely on others, particularly those in her party. With all that being said, let's move on to Shuro, a member of the former party prior to Fallon's death. Shuro's full name is Toshiro Nakamoto. He is also from the eastern part of this country. Izutsumi is initially part of Shuro's retainers, of which he has many. Shuro can't stand Laios. He doesn't like him, he finds him creepy. He never understands what Laios has going on in his head. And the unfortunate part for him is that he can tell that Laios is approaching everything with good intentions. Laios thinks they're friends. Shuro also has a big crush on Fallon, despite Laios and Fallon displaying very similar personality traits. He also condemns the use of black magic to resurrect Fallon. However, he also acknowledges there probably wasn't another choice, and had he been there, he would have done exactly the same thing. Shuro's retainers in no particular order are Naka, Iyo, Tade, and Matsu. All four of them are very talented in their own right. Another ally, in a sense, is Kensuke, Laios' sword. We don't see a lot of Kensuke because he is technically part of the living armor room, and they look more like mollusks. So the most we see of Kensuke throughout the show is just his eye stalks. Kensuke also warns Laios to the presence of other monsters, but he is not above saving himself, as we see in the fight with the red dragon. Next we have Namari from the original party. She is also a dwarf. She's the dwarf I mentioned who gets on Senchi's case about not taking better care of his equipment. Laios, Marcel, and Chilchuk meet back up with Namari early on in the series when they're trying to defeat an Undine or a water spirit. Namari is escorting a pair of gnomes who are conducting magical research. They all part ways once the Undine is defeated. The next two I was a little hesitant to put in the protagonist box simply because they are part of the Golden Lands and they're the whole reason the dungeon exists. They are protagonists in the traditional sense of like they help drive the story forward, and they're not an object for the main party, Laios, Marcel, Chilchuk, and Senchi, to overcome. For the first one, Delgal, I have already mentioned him. He is the guy who came up out of the earth in the tomb and said, "If you defeat the Mad Mage, my kingdom is yours." However, he was besties with the Mad Mage friends. He was besties with them. And it is part of his desire not to die that allows people not to die in the dungeon as it gets warped by Thistle, the Mad Mage. But without Delgal, we wouldn't have Yod. Yod is Delgal's grandson. He is a resident of the Golden Land, as mentioned previously, and we actually do get to meet him in the anime in episode 21. The visit to the Golden Land and Yod specifically kind of set up Thistle as the main villain of the series, and that's something we see throughout the series, is that Thistle is the main villain, when in fact we all know, I say we all know, but we don't all know, but the actual main villain is the Golden Lion. They see the Golden Lion as a protector spirit of the land. And with that being said, let's move on to the antagonists. Obviously, I'm going to start with Thistle because there's so much still there that I could talk about. We first see Thistle when Laios enters a living painting. As I mentioned before, he's the reason why nobody dies in the dungeon, because Dogal pleaded with him to figure out a way to make sure that the country wouldn't die, or that the people wouldn't die, and this attracted the attention of the Golden Lion. And that is really the heart of Delicious in Dungeon, about how desires can be warped. But that's a topic for a different video. Thistle is an elf, the only other elf in the series that we see other than Marcel and the Canaries. While Thistle is a secondary antagonist in this series, I would argue that the Canaries are a tertiary antagonist in the series because they do seek to contain and stop the dungeon, which runs contrary to the goals of our main party. The Canaries are officially the Dungeon Investigation Unit. However, they get their nickname the Canaries from being the unit that investigates the most dangerous missions. It is interesting that they're called the Canaries and they're going into dungeons because of the canary in a coal mine, which is you take a canary with you into a coal mine to figure out if there's enough air for you to continue to survive. And if the canary stops singing, you get out. So let's talk about the captain, Captain Mithroon. Captain Mithroon has the most relevant backstory to this in that he raised Cabro, who was able to negotiate with Mithroon to leave the dungeon up and try to contain it and at least evacuate the people who reside in the dungeon before collapsing it. Captain Mithroon was also a lord of a dungeon. This is something that later happens to both Marcel and Laios, and we can see how being a lord of a dungeon is reversible, but it comes at great cost to the person who is the lord of the dungeon. Captain Mithroon does decide to go along with Cabro's plan, but again, this is contingent upon the fact that if anything goes wrong, he will send his troops in. This interaction is why I initially included Cabro in the first video, because I felt he was more plot relevant. That about sums up the antagonists for this portion of the video, so let's get into the conclusion. This video is a bit on the shorter side because I intended it as an appendix to my main video. So if you want to hear more about Delicious in Dungeon, please check out my main video, as I've been saying throughout this one. Now I turn this to you, friend, enemy, or those under review. Do you think I sorted these characters correctly? Are there any additional characters you think deserve some coverage? Would you like to hear more about desire being warped in the dungeon? Thank you for listening to me yap again about Delicious in Dungeon. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe as it helps out the channel a lot. Thank you to the 22 who have subscribed so far. Remember, being a fan is fun, and have a great day.